welcome to the main event today, which is our discussion about demystifying the LRS, the Learning Record Store, and what that means for XCL. So welcome to this week's exclusive. I'm Corinne Pagano. We have Rob Christie, our CTO. Jason Haag is our special guest from Veracity today. I'm going to kick this off by asking Sarah a question. Sarah Mercier, our CEO. Sarah, I know that you always want to talk about geeky stuff, and I usually say no, but today's the day we're going to take it. So give an intro for folks that don't necessarily know, what is an LRS?
So I'm very excited about today's session because we have gradually gotten into some of the more geeky or nerdy things, the technical side of what XCL actually does, the magic behind XCL. So an LRS, as Corinne mentioned, is a learning record store. And very simply, it is just a place where data goes. That's it. It's a place that data can go. When you take training, online learning, digital courses, anything that is XAPI enabled, the data from that content goes to an LRS. And I know your next question to me is going to be, what is XAPI, which we're going to get into today. But one of the reasons why the Learning Record Store exists is because forever, for anyone who's worked in the learning and development field for any period of time and has done anything in e-learning or online learning, you know that typically you'll get your data from whatever learning management system you have. And you'll go in and you'll run a report. If you have access to a report, those data look different depending on what platform you have. And so when the LRS came along, when XAPI came along, the goal was to make that data more standardized and give us more interoperability across different platforms, different learning platforms. So should we say what XAPI is?
You should say what XAPI is.
Okay, so XAPI is Experience API. And very simply, because we're keeping this very simple today, very simply, XAPI is a data standard that structures data in a way that is relevant to us in learning and development. And the simplified format for that, or the basic or required pieces to that data, is a person or a group or entity did a thing. And so it's actor, which is the person or group, verb, which is describing what they did, and then the object, which is the thing they did it to. That is very high level. That is baseline XAPI. It's the easiest way to understand what that is. So when you're in an e-learning course and you answer a question, I can say, Sarah answered this question, and I can even have whatever it was that I answered. So that's XAPI. And I think we should probably bring in Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jason might know a little bit about LRSs since we've now defined them. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the LRS and how we got here?
Yeah, especially since you run a company that is an LRS company.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for inviting me. What a great idea and great topic. We realize we've been in this industry for 20 plus years. I think everybody here hosting this, there's always new people coming in. I'm surprised at how rapidly our industry is growing. Really been picking up since COVID too, especially. But going back, historically, wow, we could go back. Let's go back to even the 90s, and I won't spend a long time, but it's good to have the context. Even before everything went online and the web, internet, and everything was distributed on CD-ROM. And the whole reason SCORM was created was because the military, Department of Defense, started to investing heavily in online training. They were tired of distributing these CD-ROMs all over the place, got very expensive. You also were afforded the ability to get rid of the time and place restraint of teaching in a classroom. So there's a lot of affordances associated with online learning. And the military especially was investing a lot in developing the training, the online courses. So the whole reason SCORM was created, for those of you who don't know what SCORM is, Shareable Content Object Reference Model, it was a standard that was created by the DoD. And I think it came out first version like 2099, 2001. Was to make it so their investment in the content would last quite a while. And here we are in the 20s, and we've got courses that are 25 years old that still work because of the standard that was created. And so SCORM allowed you to take a piece of content and plug it into a learning management system, and it would work in any learning management system. Let's say if you got rid of an LMS and wanted to transition to another. XAPI came about, it started in, 2008, I believe. The ADL initiative recognized that SCORM was limited to just a standard for courseware, and plugging that into an LMS and defined a lot of other requirements. Hey, we want to track simulations. We want to track video. We want to track stuff on mobile. Mobile was coming out around, I think iPhone came out in 2008, something like that. So they started this organization called LETSI, I think it's Learning Education Training Systems Interoperability, something like that. I believe Avron Barr and others led that effort. And they started this as like a SCORM 2.0 requirements effort to figure out what this next thing should be. And that's what XAPI became. ADL funded Veracity software to help engage the community and flesh out those requirements even more and develop a first phase prototype, which became known as Project Tin Can. And then around 2012, it became a 1.0 specification. And then just as recently as 2020, late 2022, 23, it became an official IEEE standard. So it's, Sarah mentioned, it's a couple different things. It's a data model for representing learning experience data in the JSON format. It's a standard and it's documentation. And then the biggest part of it is XAPI must be stored in a learning record store that is conformant to the standard. There are over 1,400 tests a learning record store must pass in order to prove interoperability with XAPI. So that, I think, is really the most critical thing in all this, and why what an LRS is and why it came out. And a little bit of the history is interoperability. SCORM gave us the interoperability of content to be able to plug into any LMS. XAPI and Learning Record Store gives us the ability for our data to be shared with other applications or to be shared with other people and other business intelligence tools and things like that, and not just be locked into the LMS. Historically, that training data, the SCORM course data, was stuck in the LMS and you couldn't get it out and do anything else with it.
Yeah.
That's, in a nutshell, why LRS and why XAPI was created together.
And I think if you're wondering why Jason knows so much about this, Jason, you were at ADL when this was happening, right? When that original Tin Can project was being funded and when that whole process was going on. And I remember being part of that early on, way early, when 2013, when the DoD adopted it and said, this is part of our procurement process now. You must be able to produce XAPI enabled content, or if you're a platform, you must be able to deploy XAPI content. And one of the things that you mentioned a moment ago is that this gives us the ability to collect data from anything and get that data and capture it in a learning record store. The beauty of this process is that no part of that requires an LMS anymore. So when XAPI came around, you no longer needed an LMS to put in a SCORM package. That didn't have to happen anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of people's ecosystems, we had created this ecosystem that worked around the LMS, the learning management system. And so if it was training, it had to go through an LMS. If you had a classroom training, you had to create a registration form. People had to register for it. It had to go on your transcript. If you had e-learning, if you had whatever. And that really drove the e-learning authoring tool industry. It was like everything also had to be put into an authoring tool so it could be neatly packaged into something that you could stick in an LMS. So what XAPI did quietly, although we tried to be loud about it, is that it disrupted how you had to do things, and it opened up the capabilities to do anything. You could track anything. You could have any type of content, and you no longer had to package it into that black box of SCORM. You could actually collect those data directly.
Yeah. And I think what's particularly interesting, and first of all, Jason, that trip down memory lane was like, you took my breath away a little bit. I forgot all the things.
You remember CD-ROMs and authorware and all that stuff,
I
didn't you?
remember sitting at ITSEC in a hotel lobby talking to the ADL guys when I had my own immersive design company around what data I wanted to track for simulations. And it was like the early days when people were just talking about this. So the fact that XAPI has matured and been adopted and standardized and is available for folks is it's a cool history lesson. And it is still depressing for me that so many organizations are trapped with SCORM, that so many organizations have been limited to only being able to get SCORM data because of the systems that they have in place. And so your point, Sarah, around you don't need actually a learning management system to track more robust data, I think I saw there was a comment, I think, from Erica in the chat about a lot of organizations are beholden to the technology that they've invested in and the limitations that technology has. So I want to talk a little bit more because I think a lot of folks, especially who are new to the industry and are not the old folks that we are, that were there at the dawn of XAPI, may not know all of what a learning record store's capabilities are and may not know what XAPI can actually do for them from a data perspective. So maybe we can transition to what are the parts of a learning record store, what are its capabilities, and what is it not, and dig in there.
Yeah, I'll take that. And I think that maybe a good place to start is maybe what is it not before I say what it is. What it is not, there was a lot of excitement when XAPI first came out. And if you want to really think about it as being big data for learning, that's really what it is. And so when you say big data, people start thinking, oh, yeah, I want to mash up my learning data with some of this other HR data. And maybe the common denominator between all these data sources is the person. There's some really cool things you can do getting XAPI data now that it's not stuck in an LMS, and you can do that kind of mashup. The right way to do it, if you do have that kind of requirement, is to use business intelligence tools. There's tons of them out there. Tableau, Crystal Report, Snowflake, you could go on and on. There's tons of them. Those were created for that very purpose. There was a common misconception early on that a learning record store is a data lake. That is not really what it's designed for. There's a reason there's 1,400 tests that are specific to that XAPI data standard. All of those are around requirements in the standard. And years ago, I believe it was DISC and Aaron Silvers and those folks worked with ADL and went through line by line on the standard and figured out what those tests were. And that's what was built into the test suite. So getting the standard compliance part of it is key. There's 1,400 tests, right? But the key thing is it stores data in the XAPI format, Sarah mentioned earlier. It provides an application programming interface for storing and retrieving that data. And okay, what is an API? It is a way for applications to exchange data. It also provides usually an interface for working with the XAPI data, doing some queries and whatnot. And then a lot of LRSs provide like a learning analytics platform and interface for creating graphs and charts. Those are like the key parts of it, and then supporting the standard. To my point earlier about what it's not, you often will we often get inquiries from people looking to implement an LRS saying, does your LRS take my data in this other format, SQL or some proprietary, and convert it to XAPI and then pull it into your LRS, and then we do all the data mashup there? That is not what an LRS is. It is not like a place to transform your data or to mash it up and do your analytics there. There are companies and people that will do that. I think that is maybe a little counterintuitive to what it was intended for, but that's my kind of a quick spiel on what it's not, and then those kind of 3 or 4 things of what it is and what it was designed to be.
And I think there's a really good comment from Erica, who's in the chat here on Zoom, about if your LMS, your learning management system, takes XAPI enabled content. So for those of you who are working with authoring tools like, I don't know, Articulate, Captivate, all the authoring tools that you use to create e-learning, you can package up content for XAPI and publish it out just like you've always published to SCORM. You could publish to XAPI in a lot of those tools. And a lot of folks, LMSs, are starting to accept XAPI packaged content. But all they're doing, they don't actually have a conformant LRS. They are taking those data and they're plugging it into whatever existing data repository they already have. And so all of the things that Jason mentioned about how learning record stores accept that XAPI data, a lot of learning management systems said, we don't want to blow up our reporting. We don't want to blow up our current data repository. So we're going to accept these packages. We're going to basically take whatever data is still SCORM-like data and give that to you. Now, there are some learning management systems that claim to have an LRS. And Jason, you had mentioned before when we had talked a week or so ago, you had mentioned some of those LMSs, you have to be very wary of LMSs that say they have an LRS. So can you tell us what are some of the things we should be looking for?
Yeah, first and foremost, there's, I don't know if you guys have a link handy, we can share in the chat, but there's the ADL conformance test that I mentioned earlier. There's actually a site where they publish every learning record store that has gone through the rigor of passing those tests, and then they publicly make them available and say, this product passes the LRS or passes the XAPI conformance test. If your LMS isn't listed there, I don't know that I would trust the data that gets stored in there. I've seen several that say they have an LRS, and they really are just trying to give a little check in the box so you'll feel that you can put your content there and then get the data out. But what we've seen is often the data still gets trapped in the LMS and you really have no way to get it out, no way to query it. And there's no tools to really see the statements or anything else, or even forward that data to another learning record store. So you want to look at that for conformance, but also just to the point of which SCORM was created to avoid vendor lock-in. You don't want your data stuck in the system in case you have to move to another one, just like you didn't want your courses stuck in an LMS in case you have to move to another one.
Exactly. Those tools. So one of the things that we look for as a consulting agency at Build Capable when we're working with our clients that are in these different learning platforms, we look to see, can we get access to the endpoint? Can we actually put data into that LMS's LRS from other sources so that we don't have to run everything through the LMS? What if I have a video that I don't want to stick in the LMS? What if I have performance support content? What if I have PDFs? What if I have an ebook? What if I have something that I want to distribute some other way? Can I still get that data into that LRS that is in that learning management system without having to deliver it through the learning management system? And if the answer to that is no, then that LRS is not working in your favor. That is not giving you access to be able to feed it data, which is a challenge.
And we're not going to dig into the XCL tool today. We do have lots of videos that'll talk about how XCL works. So check those out or ping us. We'll talk to you about it ad nauseum. But we have an LRS built in to XCL, and that LRS is Veracity, which is why Jason is here today. But talk a little bit, Sarah, about how XCL works with an LRS and some of the reasons why we chose Veracity as our partner.
Yes. So first of all, I'll tell you all a secret. I did not want to put an LRS into XCL. XCL is meant to be a tool that allows you to create a link to any type of content and capture the XAPI data in a standardized format, even if you don't know anything about XAPI. So we have tons of wrappers that exist in the world for things like video and PDFs and all of the things. And so our goal in creating XCL was to make that easier for people. One of the reasons why a lot of people didn't adopt XAPI is because they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know JavaScript. They didn't know how to set up XAPI data, especially if they weren't using an e-learning authoring tool that reported that data. So they didn't adopt it for a lot of things. So XCL was meant to be a tool that would translate whatever actions are happening in different types of content to an XAPI format and then send that data to an LRS. But here's the challenge. If you have a lot of folks that don't do anything with XAPI yet, most likely they also do not have an LRS. So it was really important to us to give people access to a light version of Veracity that they could use XCL as a tool, be capturing all of that data in the LRS along the way, and have access to all of the functionality that you have in an LRS. But ultimately, at some point, you'll probably want to get your own LRS so that you have access to all of those other features that you would get by having your own full-blown instance. So there is a tipping point But for most people who are getting started with this, and for some people, they may never get their own LRS instance. What comes with XCL is totally sufficient. But for some folks at an enterprise level, they'll probably want to get into those analytics and things like that. So it's really important for us. If you go out to look at the XCL website, we don't talk a lot about XAPI. We don't talk a lot about LRSs. We just say, we make links to your content. It sends data. You can see it here. That is really all it is. But if you need to understand more of the technical aspects of it, that's when Karine lets me get more geeky and say, this is actually what's happening behind the scenes. But maybe, Jason, could you talk to us a little bit about what would you say is that tipping point for when somebody really should get a full-blown instance of their own LRS?
Yeah, sure. Typically, our architecture is offered as SaaS, software as a service. We have a free account on the SaaS plans you can get. We also have on-premises. When do you need your own LRS? There's lots of factors that can go into it. Scalability is the big one when you've got to store a lot of data beyond what XCL offers and what we offer in our free plans. And we're pretty generous with those, by the way. So you could do pretty much a full-blown prototype and pilot to kind of prove your use case. Something we didn't talk about earlier is one of the pieces of getting XAPI adopted and getting an LRS is getting stakeholder buy-in and getting them to understand the value proposition of doing this. Having this data to prove a business impact of your learning solution, behavior change, some of those big, lofty things that we want to do as part of our evaluation strategy, right? Security is another one. So we have a shared infrastructure where people can go in and use a plan, but you're on the same web server and database with other customers. We also have a dedicated plan, and a lot of people that want their own dedicated LRS instance have security requirements. It's become a very common thing across all industries, is making sure your data is safe in the cloud. You meet a lot of privacy requirements and other cybersecurity requirements to make sure the data is safe and they can transfer the data if something ever happens, that kind of stuff. Those are a lot of the key ones. Another one I like to bring up a lot is the multi-tenancy. That is having multiple databases and not just one. Some LRSs out there just throws everything in one database. Everything's mixed together. Let's imagine you have a use case or scenario where, you want to do some testing first, and maybe you have content moving through an approval cycle where it goes through a dev environment, then it goes to a government or customer approval environment before they push it to production, and you want that data to not get all intermingled. So multi-tenancy can serve that use case as well. You could also segregate your LRS data by department or function or by each course or learning product. Let's say you wanted all your performance support content separate from all the training courses because you want your dashboards really specific to those unique types of content. So there's lots of different reasons to build your own, but I think the first one is data storage and going beyond what is provided in the basic plans we offer and what you guys offer.
Yeah, totally agree. One of the things that we've always recommended, I won't say 100% of the time, but most of our clients, we start them on a low plan and let them build up to it based on what their usage is, how much data that they're actually collecting, what their needs are as far as multi-tenancy, like Jason mentioned. Do you need something that's specific to this part of your business? And so some of those things, you could have an LRS of record where you're forwarding data to it from other LRSs. So there are a lot of different use cases. I think if this is totally new to you, the cool thing about XCL is that you can get started, you can start deploying content, you can see how XAPI works, you can start gathering your data. And if you get to the point where you need more scalability, right? Or from a security perspective, you want to be on your own server, behind your own firewalls, those types of things, on premise, those types of decision points. It's so easy to switch LRSs. And I think I want to end on this is how simple it is to switch from one LRS to another. You can actually export, if it's a conformant LRS, you can export your data from one LRS, import it into the one you're switching to, and keep it moving. One of the things that XCL does is that in XCL, you can point to whatever LRS you want. So you could have 10 different links pointing to 10 different LRSs if you want to. And that gives you that flexibility to use your data however you want. And I know I said I would end on that, but I did want to mention there's also a comment in the chat from Mike who said, I've got all of this XAPI data. It's just a torrent of data. When you start to use XAPI, you have so much data. And one of the things that's really valuable in 2025 is using those analytics tools that Jason started with. If you are able to use AI in your organization, we actually built a GPT to use specifically with XCL. And because XAPI data is in a standardized format, it knows what to expect. So it's very easy to get your analytics visualizations, things like that with your data so that you can very quickly filter things down and get reporting, Mike. So there are a lot of ways to do that now that if you don't have advanced analytics tools in your organization, that AI tools are actually incredibly useful for. And we do have some querying functionality, Jason, both in XCL, which is Veracity anyway, but in Veracity's full instance, there are all sorts of ways you can query all of those data.
Yeah, I just to comment on there's so much data, we're not sure how to parse it kind of sentiment, because I actually hear that a lot with organizations. Like, okay, now we have all this data. What do we do with it? Two things. One, you should know the questions that you want to answer about your data. So you should start to identify, what do we actually want to know? What's meaningful to our organization? What do we want to measure? And then what is the data that we actually need to answer that question? But the second reason why XAPI is and should be seriously adopted by every learning organization today is that AI needs to use data to train and to be smarter over time. And if your organization is investing in AI and you don't have the data to inform and train those models, then your AI is not going to be very smart. So XAPI actually allows your organization to start saving much more robust data, much more interesting kind of details that AI can use to be smarter and help your organization over time. And so organizations who are already using XAPI but never really took advantage of the data already have a ton of data that they can start leveraging to train AI models. But if your organization hasn't gone there yet, this is the time to really start investigating XAPI and really getting that standardized data that can train those AI models. It's going to be a game changer.
If I can add a little bit to that too, playing with the AI stuff is cool, but it does like really good data, conformant data. So that's another push for why you should use a LRS that is conformant. Otherwise, it doesn't really, it's a little difficult to work with if the data is not very clean.
Which is a huge benefit of XCL because we standardize the data going in. So we make sure that the data going into the LRS is cleaner because we've profiled it all out for you rather than you relying on your authoring tools standardizing that for you. So we've standardized it all for you. And if you're in an enterprise account, you can control your translator and you can standardize it further based on your own organization's data strategy. So I think that's a great point.
I think we are out of time, and I feel like we need to have a whole nother session on XAPI and AI, but that's a future date. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today. I knew this was going to be a fun one, and it was. And I will look forward to seeing everyone next week when we are talking about skills, which is my favorite subject. So stay tuned. Join us next week. Thanks everyone for joining. Talk to you soon.